Before saying a few things about the movie you are about to see, I would like to briefly introduce you to the woman who is the subject of my book and the author of the novel on which this film is based, Ursula Parrott. She was Boston-born as Catherine Ursula Towle in 1899 to Irish Catholic parents, and she attended the Boston Girls Latin School and graduated with a BA from Radcliffe in 1920. So she had the good fortune of being born and raised in an area that had very progressive beliefs about women's education and parents who supported that. So in order to send your daughter to Boston Girls Latin School, you had to promise to send her to college after if she wanted to go to college. She eloped to Greenwich Village in 1922 and married a journalist named Lindsay Mark Parrott, had a son in 1923, went through a difficult and long separation and got divorced in 1928, the first of what would end up being 4 divorces over the course of Ursula's life. So in her 20s, she found herself a divorcee who had a child and herself to support without any clear path to take. And luckily she had that college education, so she got a job writing advertising copy at a series of department stores. And she had a few realizations while she was at this series of jobs. One is that she was not alone. There were a lot of other young women who found themselves divorced, many of whom were raising children and trying to figure out how to navigate life as a divorcee. The second realization was that she hated the work. She was good at it, but didn't enjoy writing advertising copy. And the third was that she was a really good writer. And so she ended up writing a book, which was an only slightly fictionalized version of her travails and adventures, and anonymously published that book in 1929. It was called Ex-Wife. And this is the book on which the next film we're watching this afternoon is based, so I'll say more about it then. But it changed the course of her life overnight. And it was the first of 20 books, many of them bestsellers, and over 100 short stories, articles, and novel-length magazine serials that Parrott published from 1929 until the late 1940s. And she also worked as a screenwriter in New York and in Hollywood, and there were 10 film adaptations of her published work. So she was a very well-known figure in her day, and then completely erased, basically, from literary and cultural history. And so part of the project with writing this book was trying to restore her place. And if you are a New York Times subscriber today, just this morning, they published a piece about both my book and about the reprint of Ex-Wife that's coming out with McNally Editions next week. So you'll be able to read Parrott's best-selling novel for yourself in a few days. So, when the New York Herald Tribune published Parrott's story, There's Always Tomorrow, in the fall of 1934, they assured their readers that it was a triangle story that ends with all 3 people happy. It is about Joseph and Sophie White, a middle-aged, middle-class couple with 5 kids, on the eve of their 24th wedding anniversary. Joseph basically feels very disappointed about his life, and when his old flame Alice, who's a successful career woman who has never had time for a happy marriage, arrives at his door, he's very happy to rekindle an old friendship. So Joseph starts pretending to go to weekly fraternal organization meetings, but instead heads to Alice's rented rooms for fireside chats and sandwiches and coffee, after which they would, the story assures its readers, shake hands before he went home. Parrott sets a perfect scenario for an affair in the story, which she does not allow her characters to have. After a confrontation with Joseph's children, Alice announces that she is leaving town. So remember, the New York Herald Tribune promised its readers a happy ending. So this is the happy ending. I'm going to read it to you. Joseph White would find remembrance of her ardent voice, her kiss, solace against all the monotony and weariness of living, believing that he was fortunate because somewhere in the world one person loved him, not from duty or habit or from anything he would do in return for love, but just for himself. Wow, that's quite a happy ending, isn't it? So the reader finds out how Joseph will spend the remainder of his days. But what of the career woman Alice? Well, it's pretty extraordinary to me that the story doesn't say, because her character was written by this tremendously successful career woman who was preoccupied with how difficult it was for women to have it all. So to the film at hand, Universal bought Parrott's story, which became the 7th film adapted from her writing, announcing to its exhibitors that Ursula Parrott is a name to conjure with. They marketed the film as a great picture for the whole family, which was partly differentiating it from Parrott's racier tales from just a couple of years before, like The Ex-Wife, which became The Divorcee. So we're gonna go from modest to racy. So we're gonna go in the right direction this afternoon. So it starred Frank Morgan from, you probably know him from The Wizard of Oz, Lois Wilson and Benny Barnes, and this 1934 adaptation takes place in a world that feels a little bit more quaintly turn of the century, but otherwise hews really fairly closely to Parrott's story. I think it's worth noting that the film has a pretty morally unimpeachable plot. It's really a chaste tale that seems ready-made for Hollywood in the age of the production code, at a time where there was increased self-censorship, essentially, of movie content. The Production Code Administration reported being very impressed after screening the film, and Joseph Green, who was the head censor, reported liking it immensely. So when the film was released, Ursula Parrott went on the radio to talk to Margaret Santry on her radio program about seeing her name in lights at the local Village Movie House in Wilton, Connecticut, where she had a country home where There's Always Tomorrow was playing, and she walked up to the ticket window and told the girl at the booth who she was, oh, I wrote the story that this is based on, and she said, I want to look in on my picture, and as Margaret Santry explained on the air, the girl looked at her coldly and said, the tickets are 35 cents. So, one thing that you may want to notice as you watch the film today is the way that Alice, the career woman, is not demonized. I think it's a really interesting thing to observe. She's tragic, but she's not a villain. And a number of the reviews of this film noticed the way that she was not painted as a bad woman or a fallen woman. And one review of the film described Ursula Parrott as a writer who has won a reputation for her keen insight into the lives and loves of married couples, noting that her books are avidly sought as movie material by Hollywood producers because of their wide human appeal. I think it's an important thing to observe that Parrott was known for social problem tales that were really focused on women's experiences. And this is part, to me, of a broader, more complicated conversation about why a book like F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby is so widely known and taught, junior high school, college, grad school. I've been thinking a lot about that book and why it's so overshadowed a book like Parrott's Ex-Wife, which is so much about women's experiences in the same era. So a tiny postscript before we start the screening is that Parrott's story apparently aged very well because Universal, who often remade its 1930s films in the 1950s, this is a very smart way to save money, right? Because you already owned a property. In 1956, they remade this film by tapping Douglas Sirk to direct a remake in which Barbara Stanwyck starred as the career woman who cannot find love in her busy life, and Fred MacMurray as the husband who cannot find happiness with his wife, played by Joan Bennett, and his family. Parrott's story of the dullness that frequently goes along with married life took on new meaning in the post-war suburban United States, even though the story remained the same. So I hope you enjoy the screening of There's Always Tomorrow, and I will be in the lobby between screenings, and I'm happy to sign copies of the book that they have on sale at the concession stand. And thank you for being here. Enjoy the film.